Pam Electric Ghost, and we are live on our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch channels with Finley Clark. We're happy to have you on the
Hi,
broadcast. So this is the
happy
first
to
time
be
we
here.
thank you. It's the first time we've interviewed you, and you've got your first published song out, right?
hmm Yeah,
And
yes.
yeah, we're gonna actually show the video from lessons from a great cult leader from your YouTube. It's more
hmm
like a lyric video, right? So we're gonna show
Yeah,
that video, and then we're gonna talk about your music. We sent you some questions, so we're gonna cue that up. We actually have it ready to go, so you'll see it coming up. So that's the preview, and then we'll put you on mute, and then we'll play the whole length of the video, and then we'll talk about your music and this song in particular, and everything that you did to get this published. So like, hold on, and we'll bring you back right after we finish playing the video. Okay?
okay.
Wait for me at the Sin City gate, 'cause I've burned all the bridges, then built them back again. But how come I still need ya? After all this time, we were wild like Marilyn and Dita. We like putting on a show and giving fever. The lessons from a great co-leader will last you a lifetime. Tell my mom, tell my dad, once I'm gone, I'm never ever coming back. Tell my mom, tell my dad, once I'm gone, I'm never ever coming back. Tell your driver to chase that sunset. Never let a day pass without happiness. 'Cause we got oh so many stories. We just can't get enough. We were wild like Marilyn and Dita. We like putting on a show and giving fever. The lessons from a great co-leader will last you a lifetime. Tell my mom, tell my dad, once I'm gone, I'm never ever coming back. Tell my mom, tell my dad, once I'm gone, I'm never ever coming back. Thought I would stop playing with your dragons, but here I am again. Fell off the wagon, this time I know my way around the dungeons, 'cause I learned from the best. Tell my mom, tell my dad, once I'm gone, I'm never ever coming back. Tell my mom, tell my dad, once I'm gone, I'm never ever coming back. Tell my mom, tell my dad.
So we're back, and that was lessons from a great cult leader from Finley Clark, and we'll go back to our full view. So that's a really interesting song. I like the guitar on it. It's really cool. I mean, and the actual title, I'd like to like understand like what your the whole story behind the song and what it means to you. 'Cause I know the audience can kind of interpret your lyrics in their own way, but I'd like to understand from us as a singer songwriter, what your meaning is behind the title.
I wanted to make a song about topics that are a bit sensitive, and I feel like everybody goes through moments where they come across people that are more or less toxic. But I wanted to make a song about that that people can also dance to. I didn't want to make a sad
Mhm.
ballad about it. So I kind of wanted to find an umbrella term for toxic people in general that unwillingly teach us a lot of lessons throughout our life. They teach
Mhm.
us how to uh, become better at maybe spotting them and avoiding them.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
never a mistake, always a lesson. So I didn't want it to make it sound like lessons from toxic people. I wanted to make it sound like lessons from a great co-leader, because toxic people don't necessarily intend to be mentors or to teach us anything that can be used in our advantage, but unwillingly they do teach us in the end a lot of things about ourselves and about life.
yeah. I think that's interesting because, like, a leader, they have a lot of influence, and so if you have like you have a leader that's benevolent, then you have that type of um, outcome. But when you have a toxic leader, and I think in the last 4 years in the U.S. we've kind of experienced that from one way or the other. But yeah, I think it's a
Yeah,
worldwide phenomenon. There's like many examples in history of toxic leaders. That they drove their countries into the ground. Hitler is a good example. Stalin, good example. Idi Amin.
yeah.
And then you have
I
like
didn't
cult.
want to get too political,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Well, it kind of is inherent in what you're saying. I mean, I understand you didn't want to get too political, but when you say toxic leader, your
hmm,
audience can interpret it however they want to interpret it. I'm not trying to put what you believe, but as somebody in the audience that hears that, they're going to kind of, well, who's the toxic leader in history? I think
yeah.
they would bring that up. Um, but
Tyrants most of the
yeah,
time. Yeah,
tyrant. Yeah. I mean, and Hitler. I think everybody can agree.
yeah.
um, but but so I won't get into more modern leaders because that's more political. Um, so maybe get into the questions because then we'll kind of back into your first single again. But I like to get the history. We'll start at the beginning. Like, when did you first get into music? At like what age?
So I grew up. I was a kid. I was about 5 or 6 years old when I joined the church choir and then the school choir. And I also kind of always perceived music as linked to dancing because I also did rhythmic gymnastics. So when I
Hmm.
write music, I try to create sonically um, music that I can dance to.
But I think it's important, because like within the U.S., like the African American tradition of music has always been kind of very rhythmic, very kind of dance focused or beat focused. If you go back to the soul music, had a really good beat like Motown, and in today's with hip hop and even rap
Yeah.
before that. Um, yeah, but you can always say something because it's interesting. Like you have a beat, but then you're saying something that's really interesting because most pop songs don't have a title like your title and they don't go into that. It's more like, okay, let's have fun, let's do this. But your title kind of invites that you're bringing a level of seriousness in, which is interesting. Um, but so when you started to get into music, like, when did you want to write your own music? Because a lot of people like they learn classical music, they learn piano or violin. Did you focus on your voice or did you focus on other like learning an instrument?
I was focusing on my voice as I did both school choir and church choir. And at some point, I just started writing poems. I was around 11 when I did start writing poems.
Now, when you
And
wrote the poems,
yeah,
did you start to, like, change them to become, like, songs? Because poetry in itself sometimes, spoken word poetry is different than lyrics. When did you kind of figure out how to actually adapt poetry into, like, musical lyrics?
in high school, I did that. Yeah. I just
So
write. Yeah.
So did you have music projects before what you're doing now? Did you release music, or have you held on to most of your music until this
It
release?
it was more about live sessions and jam sessions. For example, in college, I had this project about um, playing Shakespeare sonnets as
Hmm.
music.
Okay, so you do
Um,
experimental.
so
It's very
sessions with acoustic guitar, yeah, jam sessions.
so. What made you want to actually take it to the point where now you're releasing, commercially? Was that the overall goal when you first started that you
Um,
wanted to do that?
no, I think it just happened, really. It was never planned. I just became really, I guess, experienced at writing, and
Mhm.
I like the idea of telling stories through different mediums, filmmaking, music. But I love music the most. It's the kind of language that everybody understands, and it just comes easy to me.
So, when you realized that you had a talent and you started writing your own material, this song part of a bigger set of songs? And did you choose this one? Is it actually part of like an album or an EP, or are you going to be doing additional singles?
Yeah, I will definitely be releasing additional singles and then eventually turn this into an EP and then hopefully into an album.
So is a lot of the music already written, or you're in the process of writing it?
Uh, some of it it's already written and it's almost done. I'm just releasing it um, gradually.
Hmm. So when you wrote the music, was it written in the last year, like during the pandemic?
Yes,
And
yes,
when
it
you
was.
write, that's cool. I guess the question is like, was it hard to do that? Because is are you primarily like your own producer? Were you able to do everything yourself, or did you have to work with other people?
I work with a small studio in my hometown for recording and mixing and mastering. I also started producing music in Ableton Live
Or you
11.
have
Um, yeah. And sometimes I just play piano, I just improvise. It really helps me find the kind of sound that I want to translate.
so piano
From
is is your writing instrument? Do you use piano as the primary writing instrument, or do you use guitar, or do you use like both?
Yes, yes, I use I have an Arturia.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, I
So
just
like
play it
Arturia,
and
like an Arturia Keylab hooked up to like a
mm-hmm. 49 Kilab, yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's a good machine. So you're using it hooked up to the Arturia suite of sounds, or do you use like a
Mm-hmm.
soft
Well, I use it with Ableton.
Ableton? So you get your sounds from Ableton.
Mm-hmm.
So so in the DAW, how much work do you do on your demos as a singer songwriter? Do you write like a demo that's pretty close to the finished product, or is it more raw and then you finish it in the studio?
I usually record the melody. So when I write songs, I write the lyrics with the melody in mind.
Mhm.
It's never just the melody and then I add the lyrics or vice versa. It always has to be both at the same time. So when a lyric comes to me, or maybe like a full segment of a song, it's always with melody included, and I just try to create like a little demo in DAW in Ableton.
So do you often like write at the piano? Because I'm a keyboardist myself, and I find sometimes like I might be writing like you write in different ways. Like sometimes I voice memo something that I'm out on a walk, or
Yeah.
write it on a napkin. But when I'm in front of my keyboard, because I have like I'm a synthesis, so I have all these like Rolands and stuff, and Moogs, and I find that like if I'm in on my Moog, because it's an analog synthesizer, sometimes it is very it kind of is very experimental. It will create all kinds of weird rhythms, and if I put my microphone near me and I just start playing with what the Moog gives me, I find that I get like it's actually really helpful to actually write, a stream of consciousness lyric right at the board, and then maybe work on it. Over the years, I found that I like writing that way. That my scratch like
Mm,
initial demo is usually at the board, just because I found that I like the stream of consciousness style of writing. Everybody has their own style. Just
mhm.
wondering, have you done that? Is that part of what you do?
Well, I don't know if it's because I have a degree in literature or not. I've always been kind of a storyteller. So, even though stream of consciousness is a really good medium, I prefer to frame the story as part of a certain concept. Like I rely a lot on escapism and the idea of creating a sound that is transportive, that can take you to a different world. I like the 70s as inspiration,
Mm.
and Americana. So when I make music, I like to kind of like send you into a different dimension. Like you're just listening with your headphones on, and you're in a room, but you're really
Yeah,
like the song takes you different places.
I think that's interesting when you bring up the '70s. I'm a child of the '70s. I'm in my 50s, and I kind of think of like progressive bands like Pink Floyd and Yes and Genesis. And what I liked about those bands was the fact that they super experimental. I mean, if you start the original Pink Floyd with Sid Barrett, it was like very psychedelic,
Yeah.
and then they became more like a rock opera band, like the Who. They continued like the
Mhm.
idea that Pete Townsend had with Tommy and Quadrophenia, with like Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here. And what I liked about that time period is, like, I would go buy an album on vinyl, and I bring it home, and it isn't like today where everything's like a playlist. You go buy it, you bring it home, and you put your headphones on, and you listen to the whole thing, and it was a
Yeah.
very cool experience because you got to hear an artist's complete thought,
Mhm.
that it wasn't just one song, it's a whole suite of songs, and they're all interconnected. So, I guess the
Yeah.
question as a writer, is your work gonna be kind of album centric or interconnected songs? Is that how you write, or each song is its own thing?
Definitely. I definitely write songs that are part of the same universe. Like for example, Stephen King. He writes novels that are usually centered in the same area of Maine. You know,
Yeah,
I kind of write music from the same place. Like it's like a small town, and you're getting to know the streets. You're just taking a walk and
kind of like a film.
discovering.
Like, songwriters, I
Yeah.
think sometimes can bring you in like a filmmaker,
Mhm.
or like a playwright, right? So, a really good songwriter, like, you think about the classic songwriter like Bob Dylan, and when Bob Dylan
Yeah.
did like Tangled Up in Blue, you listen to that song, it is a story about his divorce. But he has all this allegorical stuff in it, and it's supposed to be his most personal record, but he still uses, like, 3rd person characters in the song, and it's about him and his wife, and it tells this, like,
Yeah.
amazing story that is very personal, but he still kinda separated himself from it, and I think that was the brilliance of that album is, like, it's his most personal album, but he still separated himself with these layers of characters. And I think that's always been, like, a really inspirational to me because when I look at Dylan's work, it's just so deep, and the way he does things, the way he creates these characters, and I can kinda imagine the scenes he sets, and I think that's the brilliance of it, like, when you're a really good songwriter, you can invoke pictures in your audience's mind.
Yeah, definitely. I like to use metaphors. Sometimes I tend to hide behind metaphors, and I think of songwriting as having a diary that everyone can see. So sometimes I get a little bit cryptic about
Mhm.
what I'm saying, but I like to express myself through my songs. So obviously it's personal, but I also want people to be able to relate to what I'm saying. So that's why I think storytelling plays a huge role in my songwriting process.
And when you say you're cryptic, I think like all poets like to do layers, right? Like I'm a big fan of Victorian poetry, and they had like concepts like little death, which is a way of talking about sex without talking about it in a direct way. And I always thought that that was really interesting. And you can get into poets like Wordsworth or Tennyson, right? Or you could get into a guy like William Blake. And William Blake, what I liked about his poetry, fearful tiger, tiger, fearful thy symmetry. His poems are so simple, right, in their structure, but they get to the point.
Yeah.
And then if you look at like Wordsworth or Tennyson or Lord Byron, it's a lot more verbose, right, than what
Yeah.
Wordsworth kind of fits like songwriting in some ways because a lot of his poetry you can translate into like modern songs. Um, in an easier way than looking at something like Lord Byron or Tennyson. Um, but it's still got layers of like cryptic
Hmm.
concepts. And so I'm a big fan of doing, not being so direct because a lot of times today in music that people are really direct. Um, and like the hip hop genre is
Yeah.
very, very direct. And I'm like, okay, I'm more of a fan of the older hip hop where it was less direct and more layered. And you get a band like De La Soul, like more psychedelic hip hop, and it had some kind of, like George Martin Beatle-esque aspects to it. Um,
Hmm.
that it always been Mike, and the Beatles have always been a big inspiration to me. Everybody says that, but you have to go look at the records, Rubber Soul, and
Yeah.
you look at like Sergeant Pepper's or Abbey Road, and anybody, if you look at people like that, like Dylan, Neil Young, the Beatles. Uh, I think as a singer songwriter, you got to kind of give props to the people who came before you, and look at what they
Yeah,
did.
definitely.
So, is
Yeah,
your
I
inspiration?
also, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I
Well, I'll
wanted to
ask.
say that the Beatles and Bob Dylan are also some of my biggest inspirations. Also, the Velvet Underground.
Oh wow, yeah, Velvets
Yeah.
are Andy Warhol and the Velvets are really big inspiration to me. Because I like the idea of a happening. I don't know if everybody knows what used to happen in New York, but it was like a performance art thing, right? So you'd have like the exploding inevitable was one of like this part of the Andy Warhol scene was this like group called Exploding Inevitable, Warhol, all these actors, all these like performance artists, and Lou Reed and the Velvets, and they would do these big happenings and have screens and have this psychedelic artwork and acting and performance art. And it kind of is what you see today at festivals. You'll see people doing similar type of structures, and this stuff was done, in the '60s.
Hmm.
Frank Zappa did the same thing. I mean, if you look at Frank Zappa and the Mothers of
Yeah.
Invention, they were famous for doing the same type of thing in San Francisco instead of New York. Um, but yeah, I think the Velvets, like I found out about them when I was like 18. I read an article in Rolling Stone,
Yeah.
and it said that all these artists were inspired by this band, and I had never heard of them. I said, well, who were these guys? And I went and got all the records, and I was like, oh my god. And it totally changed how I wrote songs because I was trying to be like Led
Yeah.
Zeppelin, right? I was trying to sound like I had my own band. I was 18 years old. I'm trying to sound like
Mm.
Zeppelin. I'm trying to sound like the Beatles. And then I heard this other different way. Like this is like the beginning of like this is like I'm playing like a 78, 79, 80 in my basement with my brothers. MTV just showed up And I was a child of the '70s, so Zepp was really big. Then I heard this Velvet Underground. I'm like, well, this is kind of punk. This is like lo-fi. This is not what Zeppelin is doing. And then everybody in the band was
Yeah.
like, yeah, but this is a different way of doing it. And I kind of got into this punk aesthetic. And the punk aesthetic, we like it because it's got that honesty. It kind of strips away all the pretensions and gets down to like the
The
heart.
Stooges, like Iggy Pop and the Stooges are also
Yeah, yeah,
a big inspiration. I think that's more like proto punk, but yeah,
yeah. So
definitely a big fan.
so is like when you say the Velvet, how much of the Velvet Underground kind of style influences what you do now?
I think I really like clarity and transparency in kind of like being bold about what you're saying, like even if I sometimes hide behind metaphors in my songs, I still deliver a pretty self-explanatory message, and just being bold enough to do that. I think it's something that I've noticed musicians like Lou Reed did, and
Yeah,
it's
Lou
it's
is
kind of like,
yeah.
yeah, it's just accepting yourself, your desires, the way you feel about life, and just not asking for anyone's permission, or yeah, you're just
Well, the thing is, Lou was
expressing
really
yourself.
yeah, I think what's interesting about Lou, he was willing to push the standards, right? So you sound like Walking the Wild Side got past the censors, and it has content in it that people didn't even understand what he was really saying, right? At least the censors didn't, and they let it go through. And if you think about like they're in the middle of the '60s, everybody's doing pop songs and hippie songs and peace songs, and he's talking about drug addiction, sadomasochism, all kinds of he's being very direct. He's talking about things that are not typical pop topics, and
Yeah.
they didn't do that well. But what happened is like so many other musicians and songwriters heard this stuff that it inspired like generations of other songwriters to take those
Hmm.
risks. And 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 then Lou eventually was like, he was acknowledged, and eventually he was able to get the level of success that he couldn't get in '67 or '68. Um, but it took time, and in the world today, it's so things are so immediate. I was just wanted to ask you about, like, in songwriting today, there's so many people that say, "Well, can you sound like Drake? Or can you sound like Beyonce?" You get people who producers that wanna clone existing styles. And what I
Hmm.
find interesting about what you're doing is it's not a clone of anything I hear currently. It's very uniquely yours. I can kinda hear where it comes from, but it doesn't sound like
Hmm.
anything else. And it seems like that's your intention. And so that the do you work with producers that wanna kinda mold you to what they want, or do you've always been like, I know what my sound is, and I wanna pursue people who are gonna just enhance what my own idea is?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, definitely. Like already have the vision, and I listen to music from the early 2000s, like Pink and Blink 182, but I also listen to Bob Dylan. Like one of Bob Dylan's most important songs to me is Subterranean Homesick Blues, like
Oh, that's amazing,
the
that's amazing.
message of that song is, yeah. And I'm like, how can I possibly, I also listen to Louisiana blues, Dr. Jones, a lot of,
That's good stuff.
uh, yeah, a lot of music that is kind of like very different genres. And I didn't intend to create this fusion, but it just kind of happened. Yeah.
How would you describe your genre? Like, if you're gonna go to an A&R guy at a radio station, and he's gonna spin your record, and he says, "I need to know 3 categories or 3 genres that your music is in," what would you tell them?
Electropop.
Yeah, I mean, I think it like a wider thing was like alternative or indie that is like really wide open, but electropop kind of is more modern. I think more people would understand it because like alternative kind of people think of like '90s, and indie people
Mm.
go back. So those genres kind of make people go back 10 years, 20 years, and so electropop I think is more current. And so, yeah, but it's
Yeah,
hard because I think what you're doing is like what I like to do. Anyway, I created this idea of my own little indie label, Expansive Sound Experiments, and the idea is, I'm a big fan of the original electronic musician. Like, a lot of people hear about electronic music and they think about it like EDM or trance,
yeah,
right? But I'm going back to, like, Keith Emerson or, Bernie Wall from Funkadelic, like, I'm talking about, Tony Banks from Genesis. When I talk about electronic music, I'm talking about the guys that actually play these big stacks of synths. That's kinda where I'm coming from. And a lot of people think electronic music is like, EDM, and that's more produced in a DAW or in a studio and then
yeah,
performed. And what I like to do is actually take my hardware synths and actually play real synthesizers in public, live, like, like the way they used to be played. Um, and so
yeah.
it's a mixture of progressive and rock and punk and anything I feel like doing. If I want to go sing like a Folsom Prison Blues by Johnny Cash and do it with my Moog, I'll do it. If I want to play Waiting for the Man, I'll do that. If I want to play a funkadelic song or Stevie Wonder's Saturn or something, I'll go do that. Because it's kind of whatever I feel like. And it's hard today when people you go to a club and they think, "Oh, you must be EDM, you must be trance, you must be this, you must be trap," and I'm like, "No." I mean, it's like it's hard because they want it seems like they want to pin you down. Um, and a lot of artists, you don't want to get pinned down.
It's true, but I also think that you know what they say that the art is in the eye of the beholder. So anyone interprets the music from their own experience through the filter of their own experiences. And if to some people it sounds more EDM, or if to some people sounds more rockabilly, then who am I to say? I mean, as long as they like the message, I'm I'm cool, you know, because I myself listen to a lot of different music genres, but I think electropop is a good definition for it because yeah, I have nothing against electronic music. It's kind of like linked to the um, development of technology after all. Like, of course, you can still play drums with the drum kit, but now you can create beats in a DAW. There are alternate ways to do things through electronic means. And why not do that? Why not take advantage of what technology can provide to you?
Yeah, I think it's part of what I like to do is work with live musicians, like work with a drummer, work with a guitar player. But sometimes if I, during the pandemic, I pretty much was like in most musicians, I was kind of stuck in my studio. So like, okay, I got an 808, I got like a Lin drum machine, I'm gonna use them. But I'm kind of like, I'm kind of old school. I use like hardware tape
Mhm,
recorders, like Tascams, and I hook them up to hardware synths. And so I write in a kind of more organic way because I don't write on the grid. I use like
mhm,
hardware recorders. And so it sounds a little different than if you go on the grid because you don't get locked into all the timing that the grid controls you. Like you actually are playing manually, um, which is kind of harder to do. And if you say, why would you make yourself do that? 'Cause why don't you just quantize it? It's like, well, sometimes I don't want it quantized. um,
mhm.
but
It's like
it's
taking pictures on film,
yeah, yeah.
you know? Yeah.
But it's interesting because you have really interesting guitar work on your albums. Like, who did that work with you? Is like those are musicians that you worked with?
Yeah, I work with this guitar player and he is so open to my visions. Like I literally just started humming the exact way I wanted it to sound.
Mhm.
and he just played it just the way I was suggesting. And we did that for a while, just very repetitive, very repetitive. I was also dancing to it in the studio at the same time to kind of like check if this is if the vibe is,
Was it working?
I don't
Yeah.
know, upbeat enough, yeah.
Yeah.
And then after like 10 minutes something, I was like, yep, that's our solo, that's our guitar solo.
So
So
is
I like
that
working with people that understand my vision, and they're open, yeah.
so is that type of guitar playing gonna be on a lot of your other music, or is that like a one-time thing? Because I guess without hearing the rest of your
um
catalog, is that kind of representative of what your sound is, or is it not representative?
well, for the next song that I will be releasing, which is a love song, but it's more on the punk side, I actually work with a guitar player from Vancouver. um it was a remote project. His name's Paul Kidman. And yeah, I work with with musicians that understand my vision. So I usually work at a studio. I work with a studio here in my hometown, but I am also open to remote projects.
So would you say that a lot of your good songs, a lot of your material is gonna have guitar on it, or is that, some songs will and some songs won't? But it sounds like the 2 songs there, the first song that is out now, has guitar, and then you're saying that the next song is gonna have more of a punk sound. Is guitar a big part of your sound?
Yeah, I it's either like 80s synth pop, so you have like synthesizers, or like you said, Moog synths,
Mhm.
or guitars, and sometimes just fusing both of them. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, I think in the future there will be way more songs with guitar on them than songs without guitar on them. But also,
I
like, I really like synth pop. Like, I grew up
yeah,
kind of like listening to Modern Talking and Depeche
yeah,
Mode, and I cannot really go back from that. Like,
yeah.
I definitely wrote some songs that also have synth on them, and it's kind of like the realm that I create in.
I think it's interesting when you talk about Depeche Mode because I grew up, like, right when that started, like, Joy Division. I saw Joy Division, like, when they first hit, like, in '79, and, it was like revelation, you know? I Love Will Tear Us Apart. I was like, it was a very simple line on the synth, but I was like, "Wow, that's really powerful." And then, Ian Curtis passed away, and then it became New Order. And then once I heard New Order, I said, "Wow, that is really." Yeah, it was like that new it was like new romantic. Like, it was this new wave, new romantic thing. Bowie had kinda did stuff, like that with Brian Eno in the late '70s. He did some very experimental stuff. It's kinda pre-new romantic, and I was into that with Low and his Berlin work. But when I heard Ian Curtis and Joy Division, and then they became New Order, I was like, wow, I was just hooked on it. And the thing about that new wave, it's got synths and guitar. There's a lot of guitar, and it's not just synth; it's like both. And I was always a big fan of the integration in new wave of not just having synth, but also having really good guitar. Um, and
Mhm.
it's been an inspiration even till now, 'cause, synthwave bands are kind of just, bringing that back, but, like, I'm kind of a big fan of new romantic, new wave. I've kind of that's just like,
Yeah,
I grew up with
definitely.
it, is this something I grew up with, and I'm, showing my age,
Mhm.
but this is something I like to do. Because if you're gonna play a Moog, you're gonna probably play something like a New Order song, you know? You're
Mhm.
gonna play a pad like on a Prophet 5 or something, or a Jupiter 8 or a 106. You're gonna go back and look at Duran Duran and New Order and, all these great bands from that time period, and it's very what I liked about it was it took the punk attitude and they made it poppy. and it made it danceable. So you had this kind of punk aesthetic, but then you've got actual songwriting with melody and hooks, and you can hear it's not just a punk attitude. You actually have good melody and good voice, um, which I think people appreciate. Even to this day, hear a lot of new wave elements are in modern songs.
Yeah, definitely.
So it sounds cool. I
I
mean,
think so too. Yeah.
yeah, you're really like in the way you write. It's interesting because you have a lot of things that interest me as a musician. You're doing. Like you got the love for like the fact that you name checked Lou Reed and the Velvets. That's always like a good thing to me. Anybody that like understands the Velvet Underground in 2021 is always like very cool to me that you appreciate that. This is something I just know because they're a big inspiration to me, and I've always been very impressed with their style. And then Dylan, the fact that you bring up Dylan, it just shows that you know the history, and you're moving forward. You
Yeah.
have your own style, but to have that appreciation for some of the like those type of iconic artists, I think is a good way to be or have a good starting point.
Yeah.
So one of the other questions we talk about is we talked about the DAW. You do work on a DAW and you work in a recording studio. But how much were you able to go to the recording studio? Did you just have to send stuff in and then get stuff sent back? Or were you able to go in to the recording studio to do this record?
So during the lockdown, I wasn't really able to go to the studio because they were, studios were closed in my area. So I was just working remote, and that's kind of like you need a lot of patience for that because we're talking about different time zones and just emails back and forth, meetings, and I'm also very specific about what I want. So that can take a long time
Was that
to
really
come
hard?
through to
Was that hard?
fruition.
Was it? I mean, I know with musicians, like I've talked to a bunch of musicians, and they're like a drummer. I was talking to this drummer, and he was like, he was having a very hard time doing remote collabs because his
Hmm.
style of playing, he was kind of dependent on the artist being in the studio because he kind of like would get cues from the guitar player, get cues from from the bass player. Not that he couldn't do it, he just didn't enjoy it. He just like he really didn't like it because he didn't feel it was really giving him the best way to perform.
I don't really have a problem with that. I am pretty spontaneous in general, but I just noticed that I work way faster in an actual studio than remotely, you
Mhm.
know? Like when I'm in the studio, I can also improvise, just come up with stuff on the
Mhm.
spot and finish way faster. Like I can finish a song in like 6 hours max, like everything. I don't really
Yeah.
take breaks. I mean, maybe I should, but I just get caught
Well,
up with everything and I love the process. But with remote work, I think it's the future because obviously, why wouldn't you want to collaborate with someone in Australia or New Zealand? Or I mean, if you have the possibility, why not take advantage of that? But um, maybe at the moment we still need to like develop tools or softwares that can maybe facilitate
yeah,
communication uh, between artists around the
yeah,
world.
I'm actually in my another job I have. I'm collaborating with an inventor that is working on like virtual studios that have very low latency, which means that you could actually
Hmm.
record live in like different locations and not have latency problems and actually have a feel like you're actually working together, um, working on stuff like that as a side thing that I'm into technology. But um, yeah, I think the big problem I have with is the lack of being able to feel like you're in a virtual environment where you could kind of just freeform jam. A lot of what I do as an old school kind of synth player. with hardware synths on a big stack is like I play with a drummer, I play with a bass player, I play with a guitar player, and we kind of like the Allman Brothers or something, or like Funkadelic. That's what I like to do. If I like, I a lot of my recordings are recorded at a jam session that then evolve kind of like in a Frank Zappa way. I'll go back and listen to tapes and then splice one tape from one performance with another one and take an idea from this one and that one. But it all came from like live jamming, and then kind of construct it. And when you can't live jam, it's harder to do that. you
Yeah.
um, so it's like, yeah, I can appreciate like now everybody's getting vaccinated and places are starting to open up. In the US, we still have like not full capacity. So the question, do you have places you can play where it's actually like worthwhile because the capacity makes sense to do it? Like a lot of times, like in the US, like if we can't, you can only play at 25% capacity, then it's not even worth it to go to New York, right? Because I'm in New Hampshire. I have to go like
Mm.
4 hours, and you won't make enough money to justify driving 4 hours to do that. Because the place won't
Yeah.
have enough tickets, and you can't make enough money back for the money you put into it. Um, is that still a problem where you are? Are you able to do live performance yet?
I mean, not really, just jam sessions with friends because obviously there were limitations and just a lot of restrictions. Even with parties, like we kind of switched from going to clubs or festivals to now organizing house parties, you know.
Mhm.
But thankfully, festivals are now reopening. Like, for example, there's this festival in the UK called Victorious in Portsmouth um, in August, and I'm just really excited to go there. Um,
You ever
it's
perform
really
there?
cool.
You gotta perform there?
I will have a booth there with merch,
Oh,
and yeah, I'm really excited to
well, you should get back on the road.
just
It's cool to be back on the road,
yeah,
to actually go to an
yeah,
event.
also be around like-minded people and just yeah,
Yeah,
making
yeah,
friends. Hmm.
I think that's the big problem with 2020, was that, musicians, we kind of live on our connections. Right? So you go play, like if I go to New York and I play in a club, right, and it's like electronic music night, and I get to see like 10 other bands. By the end of that night, I connected with all those bands, right? I connected with the radio DJ that came, the bloggers that came. Everybody's like connecting, and that's how you get your next gig. That's how you get your next, feature or whatever. And it's harder to do that on the net. I mean, with this podcast, I've been able to actually do it. Um, because I connect with people 3, 4 different musicians a week. Um, but, not everybody has a podcast. And so, the physical face-to-face interconnection that people have, I think it was a big detriment to a lot of musicians, in 2020, and hopefully 2021, 2022, we can get into a better place.
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about it. I mean, I think people want to party now more than ever. So the sky's the limit.
That's interesting you talk about house parties. I never thought about that. I mean, I know when I first started, when I was a teenager, that's what my garage band, that's what we did. But, I never thought
Yeah.
about doing that, but that you kind of brought a new idea in my head. I say, "Hey, that might be a good idea." Because there are some house parties, like, in the US where these houses aren't like normal houses, they're like little mansions. So you can have actually a bigger party than you thought. You can actually have 200 people at somebody's house. In some places. So that might actually be just as good as going to a club. Because some of the problems in the pandemic in the US, I don't know if it's happened where you are, is like some venues have permanently closed and we don't know
Yeah.
what's going to replace them. Did you have the same kind of problem?
Not really. I just I don't know, I still go to the same places that I used to go to before the pandemic.
Visiting
And
some places
even
closed.
more so now that it's summertime and there are a lot of outdoor hubs, if you want to call them like that, for jam sessions, you know, where people
It's
just come to have like a picnic, and they can also listen to musicians play their instruments.
So have you been one of the questions we have is like, have you been actively collaborating on other people's projects, or have you been totally just focused on creating your own brand and your own project? Are you like doing features on other people's
Um,
records, producing other people's records?
I'm currently collaborating with a hip hop artist, and I will be making a song for his projects, and he will be making a song for my future EP. So it's kind of like a mutual thing. I don't know. I really like hip hop too. Like I said, I listen to a lot of music genres, and I really like the way he writes his lines, and it's just amazing.
So when you work with other people, do you still go by Finley Clark, or do you change your persona? Or you just because some people I know artists that, like, if they work in a totally different genre and they don't know if their fans will follow them, they actually use, like, a pseudonym. Or do you just use your name regardless? You don't do that? Just a question.
I mean, to me, there's no difference really. Like, there's no persona. Like I said, if anything, I don't consider myself a character when it comes to my music. You know, like I'm not playing dress up or anything. I'm more of a narrator.
Mhm.
So there's really no persona involved. Um, but yeah, I use Finley Clark for all of my projects. Yeah, for all my musical projects and beyond.
No, it's just good to know so your fans, like, the people who listen here, they'll be able to follow you and anywhere they see Finley Clark, they know that you're working on you that's you. You know, you're not changing your because some people, they it's just a choice you make when you go to push yourself out there, as a
Yeah,
musician.
maybe if some point, maybe if at some point I'll start a band or something,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah, you never
probably like think of a really funky name for a band and
yeah,
just, yeah, I
just
don't know
how
what the
I kind
future
of grew
holds.
up. Well, I'm a big fan of, like, Bowie, right? So
Yeah,
I like when he started, he was David Jones. He tried to just be David Jones. It didn't work, right? Like Lady Gaga tried to be like who she was. It didn't work. Then she became Lady Gaga. So some artists they create the stagecraft. They create a other them, other me. And Bowie was famous, Aladdin Sane. He created like Thin White Duke, Ziggy Stardust. He would go into like a character actor, like a method actor. And, there were stories that
yeah.
that Bowie actually stayed in character as Ziggy. During the Ziggy time, he'd actually stay in character, like, the whole time. Even when he was off stage, he would stay as Ziggy. Um, and that's just something he chose to do. It's a if
Hmm.
he was more into theater and music at the same time. Um, and then you have musicians who are more pure musicians, and they're like, they don't have time for that. 'Cause I can understand, like, a jazz musician is like, "Why would I go into character? I'm gonna just play,
I
you know,
mean,
like,
jazz is all about
play."
improv anyway, and just being spontaneous, just freestyling. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And
being
I'm
yourself.
yeah, big fan of Sun Ra and Monk and stuff like that. Um, so have you thought of, what the future of music is gonna be? Because we kinda live in this playlisting age where, like, you gotta get on these playlists to get anywhere. When, I kind of more EP album focused. I like to do, like, micro, releases of, like, vinyl and tapes and stuff because it works for my audience. But if you're trying to get a different strategy, are you as a musician, are you actively trying to work with the way things are, or are you doing it in a different way, however you want it to be? Like, what is your overall, like, strategy for the music business today?
To be honest, I really like the idea of vinyls. I have a vinyl collection myself. I like the idea that there's like an A side and a B side and everything's so organized. Um, but I also like the idea of playlists, like it's true. Like I'm a big fan of Spotify, and to be honest, I think I listen more to full albums than to singles. Like if I want to listen to music, I'll just play an album, you
Mhm.
know, as opposed to go to a playlist.
That's why I like vinyl.
But that's
So
just me.
yeah, I'm a child
Yeah,
of
I,
the
ki- I
70s.
kind of use Spotify in an
You on the go.
analog, old school way. Like I listen to full albums on Spotify. But I think this idea of playlists is also really cool, and
I like the new radio.
if that's the way things are heading towards, why not?
Well,
I
the
don't
only
know.
thing I think
Yeah.
I'm kind of wary of on a playlist is like it doesn't represent like your whole body of work as an individual artist. Like you might get put on a merging artist playlist. That's pretty cool. Like I think if you get put on an emerging artist playlist, right, where you like the best of a genre, right? So you get in the best of like like
Yeah. Well, I
your
think that's only going to push artists to create more unique songs,
yeah. That's what I like
Like
about
if they
that.
only get this one shot to be on a playlist, they're gonna bring the
Yeah,
best
best song. Yeah,
that
it's
they
kinda like
have
trying to
to the
get
table.
in the old world, it's like trying to get to a big radio station, right? The only way
Yeah.
you had to bring A game. But to me, the radio
Mm,
PlayStation rotation list in like
yeah.
84 or 79, how did you get on that? You had to have your best A game song. You're not gonna get on it. And the Spotify playlist
Mm,
is not that different than that. It's the same kinda idea. You get a DJ would have a show for like an hour, and he would choose to pick what he thinks was the hottest stuff, right? And so the playlist is not that different to me, except you don't have a DJ talking through it. The radio
it's
DJ
not
saying,
like MTV
yeah,
or
it's
yeah,
not a
top
MTV
40.
or it's not the like your Casey Kasem doing the top 10,
Yeah.
it's not that. Or Dick Clark doing his show, it's not that. But I think it's kind of cool when you do have like programs on Apple and different like playlists where they're trying to bring in like announcers and have people say something because I think it does kind of like give the vibe. I mean, I'm still I kind of a fan of that. I like the idea of having somebody presenting a set of music and maybe introducing a little bit, because then you
Hmm.
can actually know a little bit about the artist before you hear them, and they say, "Oh, there's this artist from Los Angeles or they're from the UK," and they give you a little bit of a heads up of who they are instead of just having it all strung together. Um, but I'm kinda old school. But, yeah, so are
Yeah.
you thinking of doing a vinyl for what you're gonna do?
Vinyl, yeah, that will be the dream, I'd love to have a vinyl. But obviously until then there are a few more steps that I need to take first, like releasing an EP, an album, and then I'll probably eventually release a vinyl as well. Why not? I love to.
Yeah, because the cool thing and, like, when I went to New York back in 2017, and I had, like, a micro release of, like, CDs and tapes and vinyl, and I didn't run that many copies. I remember, like 1,000 copies, um, just because then, I found that, like, if I showed up at a venue in New York or Boston, I could sell 'em. I could actually, it's like selling out the back of your trunk or whatever. Like hip hop people say, "Oh, I'm selling the tape out the back of my trunk." But it's like it works. Like if you go to a merch table and you have vinyl and you sign it and you give them a little poster or a little button with it, your fans are more likely to be engaged because they get closer to you. I find that the level of engagement with your fan that they get, more likely that the fan that bought that is going to buy something else. that's actually going to show up at your next gig because they actually connected with you um,
Hmm.
in a way so different. And so I'm a big fan of that type of thing. I think that you don't have to run hundreds of thousands of copies, like the record companies try to tell you. You can actually do it like a micro level, um,
Hmm.
and be successful and not go into debt. you know, and actually be able to
Yeah.
give the fans something, and then you're satisfied. And it's not super worldwide, but you can give people something that's kind of special because it's a limited edition. You know, and then
Yeah, definitely.
it gives you like
I
an
I
alternate.
like I like the idea of people connecting to the music, um more so through the music itself, um not necessarily through merch. I mean,
Mhm.
of course, it's interesting, like vinyls are cool, t-shirts, whatever, but at the end of the day, it's all about the music. And
Yeah, I
that's the
just
way
think.
I personally feel about
Yeah.
the musicians that I listen to, you know? Like,
Yeah, I think merch is just important because the way we get paid. Like, if you get paid
yeah.
off your Spotify, you really don't make a lot of money. So I think merch has become a way that it's like a necessary evil, or you can decide
Mm,
whether you do it or not. But a lot of American bands, they kind of are able to fund their music through their merch. And it's not that they
yeah.
want that to be the main thing, but in order to be able to do it, they do the merch so they can actually do the gig. And
Yeah.
so it's not like they're trying to be, into like just selling things like some,
Mhm.
Madison Avenue person trying to just push things on people, but it ended up being something that's actually necessary to the survival of the band. Um,
It's true. It's true. And the people, like musicians and artists in general have always been creative with the way that they can support themselves to create even more art for the people to enjoy. So, yeah.
well, I'm glad that you came on the show, and we hope that when you have more projects to present, we like to talk to artists. We've had people come on our show. We've been on the air since 2018. We've had,
Mhm.
guests come on 3, 4 times, some people 5 times. As they have new projects or have new things they wanna talk about, they come on and we get to see them with their new, you know, what they wanna talk about. So if that's something you're interested in, give us a ring, and when you have, more material or more projects to discuss with the audience, we can surely have you come back on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And this has been live, as we said, on our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. Permanent links will be sent out shortly. And also, we are going to be on our 11 audio podcast partners through Anchor FM, which is a Spotify company. So we are part of Spotify. And so through that process, we get to be on Apple Podcast, Radio Public, with many, many more. We're on 11 audio podcast platforms. So within an hour in the next 2 days, all those 11 podcast platforms will have the audio version of this podcast.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.